David Rodriguez had always been an early riser. At 28 years old, he had turned this habit into a morning routine that kept him grounded. Every day started the same way: a quick workout, a simple breakfast, and a walk to his office in central London. But on this particular Tuesday morning in June, something made him choose a different path. David wasn't your average office worker. For the past 15 years, he had dedicated his life to martial arts. What started as a way to build confidence as a shy 13-year-old had become his passion. His small apartment was filled with trophies, certificates, and photos from competitions around the world. The black belt hanging on his bedroom wall wasn't just a piece of fabric. It represented countless hours of training, discipline, and dedication. His job as a security consultant for high-end businesses meant he understood risk better than most people. Companies hired him to spot weaknesses in their security systems, to think like someone who might want to cause harm. It was work that required constant alertness, but it rarely put him in real danger. Most days involved sitting in offices, writing reports and explaining to executives why they needed better cameras or stronger locks. This morning felt different, though. The summer air was crisp, unusual for London in June. David had finished his client meeting earlier than expected the day before, which meant he could take his time getting to the office. Instead of his usual route through the business district, he decided to walk past some of London's famous landmarks. He had lived in the city for 3 years, but rarely took time to appreciate its history. The streets were already busy with tourists and locals heading to work. Double-decker buses rumbled past, their red paint gleaming in the morning sun. Street vendors were setting up their stalls, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from nearby cafes. David pulled out his phone to check the time, 9:45 a.m. He had plenty of time before his first meeting. As he turned the corner onto the mall, the long straight road leading to Buckingham Palace, David could see crowds gathering in the distance. He remembered that the changing of the guard ceremony happened around this time. Growing up in California, he had seen it on TV but never in person. Today seemed like the perfect opportunity. The closer he got to the palace, the thicker the crowd became. Families with children, elderly couples, groups of friends, all gathered behind the metal barriers that kept them at a safe distance from the guards. Everyone had their phones out, recording videos and taking selfies. The excitement in the air was infectious. David had always been good at reading people. It was part of his training, both in martial arts and in his security work. His instructors had taught him to notice things others missed: the way someone stood, how they moved their hands, the look in their eyes. In martial arts, this awareness could mean the difference between winning and losing a match. In security work, it could mean the difference between preventing a problem and dealing with a crisis. As he found a spot near the back of the crowd, David's trained eye began scanning the area automatically. It wasn't something he did consciously anymore. After years of practice, it had become as natural as breathing. Most of what he saw was normal: excited tourists chatting in different languages, parents lifting children onto their shoulders for a better view, teenagers trying to get the perfect Instagram shot. But something caught his attention. About 30 feet to his left, a man in a dark coat was moving differently from everyone else. While the crowd pressed forward, eager to get closer to the spectacle, this man seemed agitated, restless. He kept checking his watch and looking around nervously. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, and despite the warm morning, he was dressed for winter weather. David tried to dismiss his concerns. Maybe the man was just running late for work and had gotten caught up in the crowd. Maybe he was claustrophobic and felt uncomfortable surrounded by so many people. There could be dozens of innocent explanations for his behavior, but David's instincts, honed by years of training, wouldn't let him relax. The ceremony was about to begin. The famous red-uniformed guards, known as the Queen's Guard, stood at their posts with the discipline and stillness that had made them legendary. Their tall black hats, called bearskins, made them look even more imposing. These weren't just ceremonial soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. They were highly trained military personnel. But their role during these public ceremonies required them to remain motionless, almost like living statues. David knew from his security background that this created a vulnerability. The guards couldn't react quickly to unexpected situations while maintaining their ceremonial duties. They relied on the police and palace security to handle any disturbances in the crowd. The man in the dark coat was getting more agitated. He had pushed his way closer to the front, and David could see him more clearly now. He appeared to be in his 30s, with an unkempt beard and wild eyes. His movements were becoming more erratic, and other tourists were starting to notice, giving him space and shooting concerned glances. David began moving through the crowd, trying to keep the man in sight without drawing attention to himself. His martial arts training had taught him the importance of positioning. Always know where you are in relation to potential threats and escape routes. His security experience had taught him when to act and when to observe. The crowd around him was completely focused on the spectacle ahead. Children pointed excitedly at the guards, parents snapped photos, and tour guides explained the history and significance of the ceremony. No one else seemed to notice what David was seeing. The man pulled one hand from his pocket to wipe sweat from his forehead, and David caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. Tucked into the man's palm, partially hidden by his fingers, was what looked like the handle of a knife. David's mind raced through his options. He could try to alert the police, but the nearest officer was at least 50 yards away, and it would take precious time to explain the situation. He could shout a warning, but that might cause a panic that could be just as dangerous as whatever the man was planning. Or he could position himself closer, ready to act if the situation escalated. The martial arts had taught David that the best fights are the ones you avoid. But sometimes, avoidance isn't an option. Sometimes you have to step forward when others step back. The man was now just a few feet from the barrier that separated the crowd from the guards. One of the Queen's guards stood directly in front of him, motionless and focused straight ahead. The guard had no idea what was happening just meters away. David could feel his heart rate increasing, but his breathing remained steady. This was something his instructors had drilled into him from his earliest days of training. Control your body's response to stress, and your mind will stay clear. Clear thinking leads to smart decisions. Smart decisions keep people safe. The ceremony continued around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding. The sound of military bands playing traditional marches filled the air. Camera flashes went off constantly. Children laughed and pointed. It was supposed to be a celebration of British tradition and pageantry. David positioned himself about 10 feet behind the man, close enough to act if necessary, but far enough away to avoid seeming threatening. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides and his posture casual, just another tourist enjoying the show. But every muscle in his body was ready. The man's breathing had become rapid and shallow. His free hand clenched and unclenched repeatedly. David had seen this behavior before, during his security training. These were the signs of someone working up the courage to do something they knew was wrong. David thought about his options one more time. The police were too far away. Shouting would cause chaos. The guards couldn't break protocol without a clear and immediate threat. That left only one choice. David would have to be ready to act if the man made his move. 15 years of martial arts training had prepared his body. 3 years of security work had prepared his mind. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen next. The man's hand moved toward his pocket again, and this time, David could see more of the weapon. It wasn't a small pocket knife. It was something much more serious, a fixed blade knife with at least a 6-inch blade. The crowd pressed forward as the ceremony reached its climax. The man was now pressed against the barrier, separated from the guard by just a few feet of space. His eyes were fixed on his target with an intensity that made David's skin crawl. Everything seemed to slow down. The sounds of the crowd became muffled. The music from the military band faded into the background. David's world narrowed to just 2 things: the man with the knife and the guard who had no idea his life was in danger. David had trained for moments like this his entire life, but he had never imagined it would happen during a tourist attraction on a beautiful summer morning in London. As he watched the man's muscles tense and his grip tighten on the weapon, David knew that the next few seconds would change everything. The man took a deep breath. the same way David had seen competitors do before attempting a difficult technique in martial arts tournaments. But this wasn't a tournament. This wasn't training. This was real, and someone was about to get hurt unless David did something about it. What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, analyzed by security experts, and debated in Parliament. But in the moment it occurred, it was simply a series of actions that unfolded faster than most people could process. The man in the dark coat, later identified as 34-year-old Thomas Mitchell, suddenly lunged forward. He vaulted over the metal barrier with surprising agility for someone who appeared so unstable. The knife in his hand caught the morning sunlight as he raised it above his head, aimed directly at Guardsman William Thompson, who stood frozen in his ceremonial position. David didn't think. After 15 years of martial arts training, his body responded before his mind could catch up. Every hour he had spent in dojos, every competition he had entered, every technique he had practiced thousands of times, it all came together in this single moment. He launched himself forward, covering the distance between himself and Mitchell in 3 powerful strides. David's training had taught him that the best way to stop an attack wasn't always to block it. Sometimes you had to redirect the attacker's energy and use their momentum against them. David's shoulder connected with Mitchell's midsection just as the attacker's feet hit the ground on the other side of the barrier. The impact sent both men tumbling, but David had been expecting it. He rolled with the motion, maintaining control while Mitchell was thrown off balance. The knife flew from Mitchell's hand, clattering across the pavement and sliding several feet away. The sound of metal scraping against stone cut through the noise of the crowd like a gunshot. For a moment, the entire area fell silent. Hundreds of people who had been chatting, laughing, and taking photos suddenly stopped what they were doing. Children stopped pointing. Parents stopped snapping pictures. Even the military band seemed to pause, though they later said they had continued playing throughout the entire incident. David had Mitchell pinned to the ground, using a technique called a rear naked choke that he had practiced countless times in training. It was designed to quickly render someone unconscious without causing permanent harm. David applied just enough pressure to control Mitchell while being careful not to injure him more than necessary. "Stay down," David said firmly but not aggressively. "Don't fight me on this." Mitchell struggled for a few seconds, his eyes wild with whatever emotion had driven him to attack. But David's technique was flawless, and within moments, Mitchell's struggles became weaker. He wasn't unconscious, but he was no longer a threat to anyone. The entire incident had lasted less than 30 seconds from start to finish. Guardsman Thompson, the target of the attack, remained in his position, but David could see the man's eyes were wide with shock. The guard's training required him to stay at his post unless ordered otherwise, but his human instincts were clearly struggling with what had just happened just feet away from him. The crowd's silence lasted only a few more seconds before chaos erupted. "Oh my God, did you see that? Is that man okay? Someone call the police. Did you get it on video? What just happened? Is the guard hurt?" Dozens of phones that had been recording the ceremony were now pointed at David and Mitchell. The sound of camera shutters and video recordings filled the air. David realized that whatever happened next, it would be documented from multiple angles and shared around the world within minutes. But his immediate concern wasn't about fame or publicity. It was about making sure the situation didn't escalate further. David could see police officers running toward them from several directions. Some were uniformed Metropolitan Police who had been stationed around the palace for crowd control. Others appeared to be plainclothes security officers who had been positioned throughout the area. "I'm not a threat," David called out as the officers approached. "I stopped an attack. The knife is over there." He nodded toward where Mitchell's weapon had landed. David knew from his security training that police arriving at a chaotic scene often couldn't immediately tell who was the victim and who was the aggressor. The last thing he wanted was to be mistaken for Mitchell's accomplice or for another attacker. One of the approaching officers, a veteran constable named Detective Inspector James Harrison, had seen enough fights and emergencies to recognize what he was looking at. David's calm demeanor, his controlled technique, and the way he had positioned himself to protect rather than harm These were the actions of someone trained in proper restraint techniques. "Keep him down," Harrison told David as he approached. "Don't let him up until we get cuffs on him." More officers arrived within seconds. Some began securing the area and moving the crowd back to a safe distance. Others retrieved Mitchell's knife and began documenting the scene. A few approached Guardsman Thompson to check if he was injured and to get his initial account of what had happened. David maintained his hold on Mitchell until the police were ready to take over. When they nodded for him to release his grip, David slowly backed away with his hands visible, making it clear he wasn't armed and wasn't resisting. "Sir, I need you to stay right here," Detective Inspector Harrison told David. "We're going to need to get a full statement from you about what you saw and what you did." David nodded. "Of course, I understand." As the police handcuffed Mitchell and checked him for other weapons, David looked around at the scene. The crowd had been pushed back behind a wider perimeter, but hundreds of people were still watching, many still recording with their phones. News crews were already arriving, having been alerted by social media posts and police scanner reports. Mitchell was conscious but seemed dazed. As the police helped him to his feet, he looked around confused, as if he wasn't entirely sure where he was or what had happened. David wondered if the man had been under the influence of drugs or if he was experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. Guardsman Thompson was finally allowed to break his ceremonial position as palace security took over the immediate area. The young soldier, David could see now that he couldn't be much older than 22 or 23, was visibly shaken but appeared uninjured. "Are you okay?" David asked him. Thompson nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. "Yes, sir, thank you. I couldn't move. Protocol requires us to maintain position unless specifically ordered otherwise. If you hadn't..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Everyone who had witnessed the attack understood what might have happened if David hadn't intervened. The crowd was buzzing with excitement and shock. David could hear fragments of conversations as people tried to process what they had just seen. "Did you see how fast he moved? That guy definitely knows martial arts. He probably saved that guard's life. Why would someone attack a royal guard? This is going to be all over the news." David's phone, which he had forgotten about during the excitement, was buzzing constantly with notifications. Social media apps were alerting him that he had been tagged in posts and videos. News apps were sending breaking news alerts. Text messages from friends and family were piling up as word spread about what had happened. But David wasn't paying attention to his phone. His focus was on the police officers who were starting to ask him questions about what he had observed and why he had decided to intervene. Detective Inspector Harrison pulled out a notebook and pen. "Right then, let's start from the beginning. What's your name and what brought you to the palace this morning?" David took a deep breath. He realized that the next few hours were going to be complicated. There would be questions about his background, his training, his decision to get involved. There might be legal issues to sort out. After all, he had physically attacked someone, even if it was to prevent a more serious crime. "My name is David Rodriguez," he began. "I work as a security consultant, and I was walking to my office when I decided to stop and watch the ceremony. I noticed the attacker acting strangely and saw that he had a weapon." Harrison nodded and began writing. "And you felt qualified to intervene because of your security background?" "I have 15 years of martial arts training," David explained. "Black belt in Taekwondo, and I've studied other disciplines as well. My job involves assessing security risks, so I'm trained to notice when something doesn't look right." As David answered questions, he could see that the media presence was growing. Television news vans were arriving. Reporters were setting up. Cameras and photographers were taking pictures of the scene. Social media was exploding with videos and commentary about the incident. David realized that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't have imagined when he woke up that morning. The split-second decision to help a stranger was about to make him known to millions of people around the world. But as he watched Mitchell being loaded into a police van and saw Guardsman Thompson finally relaxing as the immediate danger passed, David knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting consequences you couldn't predict or control. The questioning continued for another hour as police tried to piece together exactly what had happened and why. David answered every question honestly and thoroughly, knowing that his actions would be scrutinized by investigators, lawyers, and the public. As the scene finally began to wind down and the crowds were allowed to return to normal, David looked back at the spot where everything had unfolded. Within 10 minutes of the incident, the area around Buckingham Palace had been transformed into what looked like a crime scene from a television show. Police cars arrived with their sirens wailing. Ambulances pulled up to treat anyone who might have been injured. Armed response units took positions around the palace grounds. Even bomb disposal experts arrived, following standard protocol for any attack near a royal residence. David found himself sitting in the back of a police van, his hands zip-tied behind his back. The plastic restraints weren't tight enough to hurt, but they were a stark reminder that despite his heroic intentions, he was technically under arrest for assault. The legal system would need time to sort out the details of what had happened and whether his actions were justified. "This is just procedure," Detective Inspector Harrison explained as he climbed into the van beside David. "We have to secure everyone involved until we can piece together what actually happened. There are a lot of conflicting witness statements, and we need to make sure we get the facts straight." David understood. In his security work, he had dealt with enough emergency situations to know that the immediate aftermath was always chaotic. People saw different things, remembered events differently, and emotions ran high. It would take hours or even days to get a clear picture of what had really occurred, but understanding the procedure didn't make it less frustrating. David could see through the van's windows as news crews set up their equipment and reporters began broadcasting live updates. His name hadn't been released yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before his identity became public knowledge. Meanwhile, Thomas Mitchell was in another police van, receiving medical attention from paramedics. David's chokehold had been perfectly executed. Mitchell was conscious and uninjured, but disoriented and confused. Police were trying to determine whether he was under the influence of drugs, experiencing a mental health crisis, or both. The knife Mitchell had carried was now evidence in what would become a major investigation. Initial examination revealed it to be a serious weapon, not a pocket knife or kitchen utensil, but a tactical blade designed for combat. The blade was over 6 inches long and sharp enough to penetrate the ceremonial uniforms worn by the Queen's. Guardsman William Thompson was also being interviewed, though he was treated as a victim rather than a suspect. The young soldier was clearly shaken by how close he had come to serious injury or death. Palace protocol had required him to remain motionless during the ceremony, making him a sitting target for Mitchell's attack. "I've been a guardsman for 2 years, Thompson told investigators. "We train for all kinds of situations, but nothing prepares you for having someone come at you with a knife when you can't defend yourself." If that man hadn't stepped in, he shook his head, unable to finish the thought. The crowd that had gathered to watch the changing of the guard ceremony was now part of a major police investigation. Officers were collecting contact information from witnesses and asking them to share any photos or videos they had taken. Social media was already flooded with footage of the incident from dozens of different angles. Within an hour of the attack, hashtags related to the incident were trending worldwide. Buckingham Palace attack, Royal Guard hero, and martial arts hero were being shared thousands of times per minute. News organizations around the world were picking up the story, with headlines ranging from "Hero Prevents Palace Attack" to "Tourist Assaults Man Near Buckingham Palace." The confusion in media reporting reflected the chaos at the scene. Some early reports suggested there had been multiple attackers. Others claimed that David was part of a coordinated attack. A few even suggested that the entire incident was some kind of publicity stunt. David's phone, which police had allowed him to keep for now, was buzzing constantly with calls and messages. His family in California had seen the news reports and were frantically trying to reach him. His employer was calling to find out if he was okay and whether the company would be drawn into the publicity. Friends from his martial arts school were sending congratulations mixed with concern, but the most surprising calls were coming from people he didn't know. Reporters had somehow gotten his phone number and were offering money for exclusive interviews. Literary agents were calling about book deals. Even a few Hollywood producers were expressing interest in the story. "This is insane," David muttered. As he scrolled through dozens of missed calls and unread text messages, Detective Inspector Harrison overheard him. "Welcome to the modern world, mate. Anything that happens in public these days becomes a global story within minutes. The good news is that the video evidence clearly shows you stopping an attack, not starting one. The bad news is that your life is about to become very complicated." As if to prove Harrison's point, David could see reporters outside the police van pointing cameras in his direction and shouting questions they hoped he might answer. Even though the van's windows were tinted, the media attention was intense and overwhelming. The investigation was moving quickly, but David knew he might be in custody for several more hours, while police verified his story and checked his background. They would need to confirm his identity, review his criminal record, which was clean, and interview him extensively about what he had observed and why he had decided to intervene. Meanwhile, social media was conducting its own investigation. Internet users were sharing videos from multiple angles, creating slow-motion analyses of David's technique, and debating whether his actions were heroic or reckless. Comments ranged from praise for his quick thinking to criticism for getting involved in a situation that wasn't his responsibility. Some martial arts experts who saw the videos were impressed by David's technique. "This is a textbook example of how to neutralize a threat without causing unnecessary harm," posted one well-known martial arts instructor. "The precision and control displayed here is remarkable," but others questioned whether a civilian should have gotten involved. "This could have gone wrong in so many ways," wrote a former police officer. "What if there had been multiple attackers? What if Mitchell had a gun? Sometimes the best thing to do is get out of the way and let the professionals handle it." The debate was academic for David, who was focused on more immediate concerns. His employer would need to be informed about the situation. His clients would see his name in the news and might have questions about his involvement in such a high-profile incident. His family would be worried about his safety and legal situation. Most importantly, David was still processing the emotional impact of what had happened. He had trained for scenarios like this for years, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of being in a life-or-death situation. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and uncertainty about what would happen next. Detective Inspector Harrison returned to the van with an update. "We've reviewed the initial witness statements and video evidence. It's clear that you prevented an attack, not that you were part of one. We'll still need to complete our investigation, but you're no longer considered a suspect." David felt a wave of relief wash over him. While he had been confident that the evidence would support his version of events, there had been a nagging worry that the legal system might not see things the same way. "However," Harrison continued, "we'll need you to remain available for additional questioning over the next few days. This is going to be a major investigation, and your testimony will be crucial for building a case against Mitchell." As the zip ties were removed from David's wrists, he rubbed the circulation back into his hands and tried to process everything that had happened. Just a few hours earlier, he had been an anonymous security consultant walking to work. Now he was at the center of an international news story that would likely follow him for years to come. The immediate chaos was beginning to settle into a more organized investigation, but David knew that the consequences of his split-second decision were just beginning to unfold. The next few days would bring media interviews, legal proceedings, and attention from people around the world who wanted to understand how an ordinary morning had turned into such an extraordinary event. Outside the police van, the crowds were still gathered, now more interested in getting a glimpse of the hero than in watching the royal guards. News crews were broadcasting live updates, and social media continued to buzz with analysis and commentary about the incident. David realized that his life would never be quite the same. The anonymity he had always taken for granted was gone forever. But as he thought about Guardsman Thompson, who was safe because of David's actions, he knew that he would make the same choice again if faced with a similar situation. Sometimes, doing the right thing means accepting consequences you never expected. David was about to learn just how true that could be. The 48 hours following the incident brought revelations that shocked everyone involved in the investigation. What had initially appeared to be a random act of violence was revealed to be something much more calculated and dangerous. Detective Inspector Harrison called David on Thursday morning with an update that made his blood run cold. "We've searched Mitchell's apartment," Harrison said, his voice unusually serious. "You need to know what we found, because it changes everything about what happened on Tuesday." David was at his office trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while fielding calls from reporters and dealing with the ongoing media attention. His employer had been supportive, even proud that one of their consultants had prevented a serious crime. But the constant interruptions were making it difficult to focus on work. "What did you find?" David asked, stepping into a conference room where he could speak privately. "Maps," Harrison replied. "Detailed maps of the palace grounds, guard schedules, ceremony timings. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Mitchell had been planning this attack for months." The detective's words hit David like a physical blow. He had assumed Mitchell was having some kind of mental breakdown or drug-induced episode. The idea that the attack had been carefully planned made it much more sinister. "There's more," Harrison continued. "We found a journal with entries dating back 6 months. Mitchell had been watching the ceremonies, timing the guards' movements, and studying the security arrangements. He knew exactly when and where to strike for maximum impact." David sank into a chair, trying to process this information. What was his motive? Why did he want to attack a guardsman? "We're still piecing that together. The journal contains a lot of rambling about the monarchy, the government, and various conspiracy theories. Our psychological assessment team thinks he was dealing with severe depression and paranoia, possibly triggered by personal losses in his life. His mother died last year. He lost his job 6 months ago, and his girlfriend left him around the same time." The detective paused before delivering the most chilling detail. "The knife he was carrying wasn't something he picked up at a kitchen store. It's a military-grade combat blade, designed to penetrate body armor. The guardsman's ceremonial uniforms offer very little protection against that kind of weapon." David felt sick. The gravity of what could have happened was becoming clear. This wasn't just an attempted assault. It was a planned attack that could have resulted in serious injury or death. "There's something else you should know," Harrison added. "We've analyzed security footage from multiple angles and we've consulted with martial arts experts about your response. The consensus is that without your intervention, Guardsman Thompson would likely have been seriously wounded or killed." Over the next day, more details emerged about both the attacker and the hero. David's background check revealed exactly what he had told police: a clean record, extensive martial arts training, and a career in security consulting that had given him the skills to assess and respond to threats. His martial arts instructors spoke to reporters about his character and abilities. "David was always one of our most dedicated students," said Robert Kim, who had taught David for over a decade. "But more importantly, he was always focused on using martial arts for protection, never aggression. What he did doesn't surprise me at all. It's exactly who he is." David's employer, Secure Solutions Limited, issued a statement praising his actions. "David Rodriguez exemplifies the kind of professional we're proud to have on our team. His quick thinking and decisive action prevented what could have been a tragedy. We fully support him during this difficult time." But the investigation also revealed how close things had come to going very wrong. Security experts who analyzed the incident pointed out several factors that had worked in David's favor, any of which could have changed the outcome dramatically. "Mr. Rodriguez was fortunate that Mitchell was acting alone," explained former Scotland Yard Detective Amanda Foster in a television interview. "If there had been multiple attackers, or if Mitchell had been carrying a firearm instead of a knife, the situation could have ended very differently." The timing had also been crucial. David's position in the crowd, his clear view of Mitchell's behavior, and his ability to reach the attacker quickly. All of these factors had aligned perfectly. A few seconds' delay or a slightly different position might have made intervention impossible. Palace security conducted their own review of the incident, leading to immediate changes in protocol. The vulnerability of guards during public ceremonies had been identified as a potential security risk, but the specific threat Mitchell posed had never been anticipated. "This incident has highlighted gaps in our security arrangements that we are addressing immediately," said a spokesperson for the royal household. "While we cannot discuss specific security measures, we can confirm that additional protections are being put in place for future public ceremonies." The psychological evaluation of Mitchell revealed a complex picture of a man whose life had fallen apart over the previous year. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the forensic psychiatrist assigned to assess Mitchell, found evidence of severe depression, social isolation, and paranoid thinking. Mr. Mitchell appears to have fixated on the monarchy as a symbol of everything he felt was wrong with his life and society in general, Dr. Warren explained in her report. His attack plan was a manifestation of his desire to strike out at what he perceived as an unjust system. The doctor's evaluation also revealed that Mitchell had been struggling with thoughts of suicide before deciding to carry out the attack. In his mind, this was a way to end his life while making a statement that he thought would have meaning. He didn't expect to survive the attack. This revelation added another layer of complexity to David's actions. Not only had he saved Guardsman Thompson's life, but he had also potentially saved Mitchell from a course of action that would have destroyed his own life as well. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to intensify. David's story had captured public imagination in a way that surprised everyone involved. News organizations around the world were covering the incident, and social media was flooded with discussions about heroism, self-defense, and citizen responsibility. Videos of David's intervention had been watched millions of times, with many viewers praising his technique and quick thinking. Martial arts schools reported increased enrollment as people expressed interest in learning skills that might help them protect themselves and others. But the attention wasn't all positive. Some critics argued that David had taken unnecessary risks and that civilians shouldn't get involved in dangerous situations. Others questioned whether his actions had been motivated by heroism or a desire for fame and recognition. David tried to ignore the criticism and focus on the facts of what had happened. He gave several interviews to reputable news organizations, always emphasizing that he had simply done what he felt was necessary to protect someone in danger. "I didn't think about being a hero," he told BBC News. "I saw someone about to get hurt, and I had the training and the opportunity to help. I would hope that anyone in my position would have done the same thing." The investigation also revealed details about the weapon Mitchell had carried. Police traced its purchase to a military surplus store, where Mitchell had bought it 3 weeks before the attack, along with a tactical vest and other equipment that suggested he had been preparing for a more extensive confrontation. The knife was designed for combat situations, explained weapons expert Colonel James Patterson, who analyzed the blade for investigators. "It's the kind of weapon that would have caused severe damage very quickly. The fact that Mr. Rodriguez was able to disarm the attacker before any injury occurred is remarkable." Security camera footage from multiple angles allowed investigators to reconstruct the incident second by second. The analysis confirmed that David's technique had been flawless. He had used minimal force necessary to neutralize the threat while avoiding any actions that could have seriously injured Mitchell. This is a textbook example of how someone with proper training can intervene in a dangerous situation, said use of force expert Dr. Michael Chen. "Mr. Rodriguez controlled the situation without escalating the violence. That's exactly what you want to see." As the investigation continued, David found himself dealing with legal questions about his actions. While it was clear that he had prevented a crime, prosecutors needed to determine whether his use of force had been legally justified. The Crown Prosecution Service ultimately decided that David's actions were completely lawful under the circumstances. "Mr. Rodriguez acted in defense of another person who was in immediate danger," announced Chief Prosecutor Helen Davis. "His response was proportionate to the threat and consistent with the law regarding citizen intervention in criminal acts." This legal clearance removed the last cloud hanging over David's actions, but it also meant that the media attention would continue. With no legal controversy to worry about, news organizations were free to celebrate David as an unambiguous hero. The investigation had revealed the full scope of what could have been a tragedy, the careful planning behind Mitchell's attack, and the precision of David's response. but it had also raised questions about security arrangements. 3 weeks after the incident that shocked the world, David Rodriguez found himself standing in the grand reception room at Buckingham Palace, wearing his best suit and trying to process the surreal turn his life had taken. The ornate ceiling, priceless artwork, and crystal chandeliers made him feel like he had stepped into a museum rather than a working palace. The invitation had arrived by special courier just 5 days earlier, bearing the royal coat of arms and requesting his presence at a ceremony in recognition of exceptional gallantry. David had read the formal language several times before the reality sank in. He was about to receive one of Britain's highest civilian honors for bravery. The George Medal, established during World War II, was awarded to civilians who showed exceptional courage in the face of danger. Previous recipients included air raid wardens who had saved lives during the Blitz, police officers who had stopped terrorist attacks, and ordinary citizens who had risked their lives to help others. David was overwhelmed to be included in such distinguished company. But as extraordinary as the royal ceremony was, it wasn't the moment that would leave everyone speechless. Prince William, who was presenting the awards that day, had been briefed on every detail of the incident. As David approached to receive his medal, the prince's words were both personal and heartfelt. "Mr. Rodriguez," Prince William said, "your actions on that morning demonstrated the very best of human nature. You saw someone in danger and acted, without thought for your own safety. That kind of selfless courage is rare and precious." David felt the weight of the medal as it was placed around his neck, but his mind was on the man whose life he had saved. Guardsman William Thompson was, somewhere in the palace, back on duty after taking a few days to recover from the shock of the attack. "Your Highness," David said, "I was just doing what anyone should do in that situation. The real heroes are the people like Guardsman Thompson, who put themselves in harm's way every day to protect others." What happened next had not been planned by palace officials, protocol experts, or anyone else involved in organizing the ceremony. It was a spontaneous moment that would be remembered long after the formal speeches and official photographs were forgotten. Guardsman Thompson, who had been standing at attention with the other palace guards during the ceremony, suddenly stepped forward. In front of dozens of witnesses, television cameras, and royal family members, he did something that guards are never supposed to do during official functions. He removed his iconic bearskin hat. The tall, black hat, made from the fur of Canadian black bears and weighing over a pound, was more than just part of the uniform. It was a symbol of centuries of military tradition, discipline, and unwavering duty. Guards never remove their hats during ceremonies except under the most extraordinary circumstances, but Thompson wasn't finished. With tears in his eyes, he walked directly to David and, breaking another fundamental rule of royal protocol, embraced the man who had saved his life. The room fell completely silent. Royal ceremonies are carefully choreographed affairs where every movement and gesture is planned in advance. Spontaneous displays of emotion, especially from guards who are trained to be stoic and unmovable, simply don't happen. The embrace lasted only a few seconds, but photographers captured it from every angle. The image of the young guardsman, with tears streaming down his face, hugging the civilian who had risked his life to protect him, would become one of the most widely shared photographs of the year. "Thank you," Thompson whispered so quietly that only David could hear. "I have a wife and a baby daughter. If you hadn't been there..." David felt his own emotions overwhelming him. Throughout the weeks of media attention, police interviews, and public recognition, he had focused on the facts of what had happened. But in this moment, face to face with the man whose life he had saved, the human impact of his actions hit him with full force. Prince William, watching this unprecedented break in protocol, made a decision that surprised his own staff. Instead of allowing palace security to quietly restore order, he began applauding. Within seconds, everyone in the room, other award recipients, palace officials, members of the royal household, joined in the applause. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, but the emotional impact of Thompson's gesture would last much longer. However, the surprises weren't over. The most speechless moment was yet to come, and it would involve the man who had started the entire chain of events. Thomas Mitchell had spent the 3 weeks since his arrest in a secure medical facility, receiving treatment for the severe depression and paranoid thinking that had led to his attack plan. The combination of proper medication, counseling, and time away from the pressures that had overwhelmed him had helped clear his mind. For the first time in months, Mitchell was thinking clearly about what he had almost done and what had been done to save him from himself. 2 days after the royal ceremony, a letter arrived at David's office. The return address showed it came from the medical facility where Mitchell was being treated. David's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope, uncertain what to expect from the man he had tackled to the ground. The letter was handwritten in careful, neat script. "Dear Mr. Rodriguez, I don't know if you will read this letter or if you even want to hear from me. I understand if you throw it away without reading it. But I had to try to tell you something that I don't think I can say any other way. 3 weeks ago, I was planning to hurt someone and then end my own life. I had convinced myself that striking out at a symbol of everything I thought was wrong with the world would somehow make my pain go away. I was wrong about everything. The doctors here have helped me understand that I was sick in ways I didn't recognize. The depression, the paranoid thoughts, the anger that seemed to consume everything. These weren't normal responses to the problems in my life. They were symptoms of an illness that made me dangerous to myself and others. When you stopped me that morning, you didn't just save Guardsman Thompson's life, you saved mine too. If I had carried out my plan, I would have destroyed my life and devastated my family. My sister would have had to live with the shame of what I had done. My father would have spent his remaining years wondering where he went wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I know that what I planned was terrible, and I take full responsibility for my actions. But I want you to know that because of what you did, I'm getting the help I need. I'm taking medication that helps clear my thinking. I'm learning coping strategies for dealing with depression and stress. Most importantly, I'm beginning to remember who I used to be before the darkness took over my life. The person I used to be would be horrified by what I planned to do. The person I'm becoming again is grateful beyond words that you were there to stop me. I don't know what will happen to me legally, and I accept whatever consequences come from my actions, but I wanted you to know that your courage didn't just prevent a tragedy. It gave me a chance to find my way back to being human again. I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand how I got so lost and trying to make sure I never put anyone in danger again. That's not enough to make up for what I almost did, but it's all I can offer. Thank you for being brave enough to act when someone needed help, even when that someone was planning to do something terrible. Sincerely, Thomas Mitchell. David read the letter 3 times before setting it down on his desk. He had expected anger, justification, or excuses. He had never expected gratitude or such clear recognition of what Mitchell had almost done. The letter forced David to think about the incident in a new way. He had focused on saving Guardsman Thompson, but Mitchell's words made him realize that his actions had prevented multiple tragedies. A family would not have to live with the shame of a relative's crime. A young soldier would not carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of his life. A troubled man would have a chance to get help instead of destroying his life in a moment of illness-driven rage. David kept Mitchell's letter private, but he did share one detail with the reporters who continued to follow his story. When asked if he had any regrets about getting involved, David's answer reflected his new understanding of what had really happened that morning. "I used to think I just stopped one man from hurting another," David said. "But I've learned that sometimes when you help one person, you end up helping everyone involved, even the person who was planning to do harm." The story took one final turn when David announced what he would do with the book deals, speaking fees, and other opportunities that had come his way as a result of his fame. David decided to use his platform and the money from his media appearances to support 2 causes: martial arts programs in schools and mental health resources in communities. He established a foundation that would teach self-defense skills while also promoting awareness of depression and other mental health issues. What happened that day taught me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones people fight in their own minds, David explained during the foundation's launch event. If we can help people develop both the physical skills to protect themselves and the emotional skills to ask for help when they need it, maybe we can prevent more situations, like the one I found myself in.